Hi, my name is Vincent Barnes, and this is my Georgia Code of Ethics presentation. Throughout this presentation, we'll gain a better understanding of a few different things. First, we'll understand better the Georgia Code of Ethics for educators, more specifically its 10 standards and how those standards help to secure an ethical workplace. Next, we'll identify some examples of code violations that either may take place in the educational setting or outside of the setting, but still may have an impact on an educator's ability to do their job. Next, we'll gain a better understanding of what punitive actions may take place if these codes of ethics are breached. And then lastly, we'll gain a better insight into how human resources plays a role in the various examples that we'll discuss. To start, the Code of Ethics for Educators, which was adopted by the Georgia Professional Standards Commission, provides the basis of which Georgia educators should follow to preserve an ethical setting for students, educators, and stakeholders. The 10 identified standards define ethical and unethical conduct, which gives justification for sanctions when necessary. A brief overview of each one of the 10 standards, starting with Standard 1 of legal compliance. An educator shall always follow the laws, no matter if it's federal, state, or local. For conduct with students, an educator shall always maintain a professional relationship with students, whether they are in or outside of the educational setting. For alcohol and drugs, an educator should refrain from the use of alcohol or illegal or unauthorized drugs during the course of professional practice. This does also include social outings that may be a school-based thing, any athletic event, so on and so forth. For standard 4 of honesty, an educator shall exemplify honesty and integrity in the course of the professional practice. Standard 5, public funds and property. An educator entrusted with public funds and property shall honor that trust with a high level of honesty, accuracy, and responsibility. For standard number 6, remunerative conduct. An educator shall maintain integrity with students, colleagues, parents, patrons, or businesses when accepting gifts, gratuities, favors, and additional compensation. Standard 7, of confidential information, an educator shall comply with the state and federal laws and state school board policies relating to the confidentiality of student and personnel records, standardized test materials, and other information. Standard 8 of required reports. An educator shall file with the Georgia Professional Standards Commission any reports that are breaches of the standards of Code of Ethics for Educators, which may include things like child abuse, unethical behavior towards peers, or any other unethical act that may come up, which is reviewed within the 10 standards. For professional conduct, an educator should demonstrate conduct that follows the generally recognized professional standards and preserves the dignity and integrity of the education profession. And then lastly, for standard 10 of testing, an educator should administer state-mandated assessments fairly and ethically. In order to learn more information about these 10 standards, including the things that makes these standards a breach in terms of their ethics or unethical behavior, you can scan the QR code below. Now we'll take a look at 10 different scenarios which pertains to the standards that we just discussed. In each one of the scenarios, we'll review the issue at hand as it pertains to the Code of Ethics for Educators. We'll discuss how I would treat each one of the scenarios as the acting principle. And lastly, we'll talk about how human resources is involved in each one of the scenarios. The first scenario that we're going to focus on is based around tutoring services during the pandemic. Mrs. Jones is a fourth grade teacher, and she's currently concerned that there's going to be gaps in the learning of her students as a result of the virtual learning setting. And to better assist them with comprehending the standards or the curriculum in place, she has decided to create a tutoring service. This tutoring service would charge $10 an hour per student, and this is information that she has shared with her families. And this tutoring service includes a personalized curriculum for the kids to help them better understand the content that is being taught during this pandemic period. Families are able to make payments through cash. They can write Mrs. Jones a check, or they can pay by credit card. And to widely broadcast these services, Mrs. Jones has created advertising material. She's posted about it on social media sites. She's created flyers. in order to help spread the word about these tutoring services. The principal was unaware of these services, but he became notified when a parent reached out to him about registering for these services for their child. So in this particular scenario, the code of ethics issue is based around standard 6, which is remunerative conduct. Again, that standard states that an educator shall maintain integrity with students, colleagues, parents, patrons, or businesses when accepting gifts, gratuities, favors, and additional compensation. The unethical conduct in this particular situation is statement number 3, which is based around tutoring students. It states that tutoring students assigned to the educator for remuneration unless approved by the Board of Education or governing body of the authorized designee. So in this particular situation, the violation occurs when she decides to charge the students $10 an hour. And also, with these tutoring services that she's created, she did not receive any prior authorization from a designee, from the Board of Education, or from her principal. So as principal, the first thing that I would do is gather the evidence of the tutoring services as they've been constructed. So learning more about its structure, learning more about what the students are being charged, when these services were supposed to take place, how long they've been going on for prior to my knowledge. Next, because of the pandemic, typically you will want to have an in-person meeting, but for everyone's safety, I would have a virtual recorded meeting to review the policies in place as it pertains to remuneration to make sure that she understands why she is in violation of the standard. In terms of the action that I would take from a punitive measure, I would veer towards giving her an informal written warning because although there is a violation that has taken place, it appears that her act is coming from a general place of concern. And I just want to make sure that she understands that although she's wrong in this particular situation, I am empathetic towards her concern for her students. And so making sure that she understands that there's a right way to go about doing things. And in this particular instance, from an ethics standpoint, this just isn't the right way. The way in which I would involve human resources, I would alert the director of employee relations to make sure that the incident is being reported because as we will discuss throughout the course of this presentation, the importance of reporting instances of ethics violations is paramount. So making sure that employee relations is informed is the first thing that I would do to involve human resources. The next thing I would do is make sure they are provided with the written summary of the meeting and the action that was given to ensure that if there's an oversight from a standpoint of maybe the action needs to have a little bit more weight, then it could provide a little bit of credence to that. The next thing that I would do is request additional ethics training for Mrs. Jones because, again, although her act was coming from a genuine place of concern, again, there is a right way to do things. And so just making sure that we can have her be educated on what those possible things are to prevent such instances from happening again. Okay, in the second scenario, we are going to be focusing on a new teacher. As we are 1 week out from the school year, I, as principal, am in full planning mode, and a part of that planning process is thinking about new teacher inductions. So we are in the process of thinking about these meetings. I've sent out reminders to all of the new teachers to make sure they are in attendance in order to learn about our school's mission and vision, to learn about the culture and the way in which we do things, and just to help them get acclimated with their classrooms, with the teachers, their departments, so on and so forth. Ms. Bennett is one of those new teachers that we hired 2 months ago and also received a reminder of the meeting. As most new teachers have already done, they have signed their contracts and they have also completed an ethics training. However, in Ms. Bennett's response, she informs me that she received an offer from a dream job that she had been waiting for, and this job offered her more money. And as a result, she is now going to be signing to work at this new school as opposed to working at our school that she's already signed a contract for and completed an ethics training for. So in this particular situation, the code of ethics issue is standard number 9, which is professional conduct. It states that an educator should demonstrate conduct that follows generally recognized professional standards and preserves the dignity and integrity of the education profession. So in this particular scenario, the unethical conduct that has occurred is the resignation that would equate to a breach of contract as a result of her signing her contract previously and completing her code of ethics training. It would suggest that she has the knowledge to not breach her contract, which, again, in this situation, is the ethical issue. So in this particular issue, there is a little bit of work that needs to be done because this kind of goes beyond just the teacher. Some states have it to where if you do receive a contract offer from other schools, that if it's within means or if it's within reasons or certain reasons, you can go to a new school. So for example, in Georgia, if you have a spouse that is being relocated and it's an unreasonable distance to travel, if you received a promotion, these are all reasons why if you signed a contract, you may be able to breach the contract in order to sign a new one at a new location. And so the first thing that I would do is to verify that the position that she's accepted is not a promotion, which in this case does not appear to be the instance. The other thing that I would do is contact the administrator at the other school to see if he or she is aware that Ms. Bennett has signed to work with our school and she has also completed her ethics training, which would certify that she is aware that she is not able to sign a new contract. The other reason why I would reach out to the other administrator is because he or she may not be aware that this can also be something that can impact his or her license as as an educational professional. The next thing that I would do is meet with the teacher and also the administrator to acknowledge that the contract was breached because she has chosen to sign a contract with this new school, despite the fact that she has previously signed a contract with my school and completed the ethics training with the district. And my course of action in this particular instance would be to terminate the contract and also go forward with a Board of Education hearing because the termination is involved. How human resources would be involved in this situation, I would meet with the associate superintendent, the chief of human resources, and also the director of certification to review the ramifications that may come as way of the breach of contract. And the reason why I chose to terminate the contract in this situation, not only because of the breach, but this indicates that there may be some issues with reliability down the line if the teacher is comfortable with breaching a contract in this way by way of personal interest. Continuing on with our third scenario, we are going to be focusing on an instance of sexual assault. So I'm now working at a high school and I'm in the process of doing class placements for science classes for our rising 11th grade students. While in this process, I'm approached by a female student who is a rising 11th grader, and she informs me that she was sexually assaulted by a male student who is also a rising 11th grader. She's not looking to make this more of an issue of the incident taking place. However, her only request is that she is not placed in the same class with this individual. Code of ethics issue in this particular scenario is Standard 8, which is required reporters, and it states that an educator shall file with the Georgia Professional Standards Commission reports of a breach of one or more of the standards in the Code of Ethics for Educators, child abuse, or any other required report. In this particular instance, because I am working with children, and as most people who work with children are told, we are all required or we're mandated reporters. So in this particular instance, the unethical issue would be for me to not report this incident that was shared with me. So what I would do as principal, and it directly ties in with human resources. One is to document any information that I receive from the student regarding the incident, but to alert the employee relations of the incident as soon as possible so they can begin their investigation. Because this is a sexual assault case, this may be one of those things where it has ramifications from an educational standpoint in terms of suspensions or tribunal hearings, but this can also have legal ramifications. And so you don't want to wait to make this kind of report. Also, because it is in the code of standards, or the code of ethics standards rather, I will also report this incident to the Georgia Professional Standards Commission for the same reason. The biggest thing is just making sure that the report is being made and that the information is being shared to assist as best as possible in the investigation. For this next scenario, we are going to talk about the arrest. And so Mr. Darcy is a teacher at my school, and I learned from a local paper that he was arrested for the sale and possession of an illegal substance. The code of ethics issue in this particular scenario is standard one, which is legal compliance. And again, an educator shall abide by federal, state, and local laws and statutes. So the unethical issue in the violation of this particular standard is being arrested for the possession of a controlled substance or marijuana as provided in Chapter 13 of Title 16, which is a Georgia Code of Law. And so, again, the arrest itself creates an issue of not only an ethics violation, but potentially termination. As principal in this particular situation, the one thing I don't want to do is rush to judgment and leave myself or any of my superiors, such as the district, human resources, the Board of Education, or even the Georgia Professional Standards Commission for lawsuits by way of rushing to judgment without knowing all of the facts or before a conviction is made. And so the first thing I would try to do is gather as many details of the arrest as I can. The next thing that I would do is encourage Mr. Darcy to report the crime to the Georgia Professional Standards Commission. In the event that he is cleared of any wrongdoing, he can preserve his certificate without never reporting and then facing any reprimand that may come of that. In terms of my action, I would place Mr. Darcy on administrative leave in order to allow him to focus on the legal process without coming to work and being distracted by his circumstances and not performing to the best of his ability at his job. Additionally, I will present any information that I have to the Board of Education so that they can conduct their own investigation. The next thing that I would do to tie in human resources is report the incident to employee relations so that they can also investigate the situation in case they're not aware of it. And I will contact the certification manager for possible action against the certificate if he is indeed found guilty. And that action may end up being termination from his position and revocation of his certificate to teach. For this next scenario, we'll call this one March Madness. Two teachers at my school who are also basketball coaches both called in sick on a day of a game between two of our local universities. As a result of the call, we've assigned substitute teachers to their classes for coverage, but I later see in a video that they are at this game and they appear to be perfectly fine and enjoying themselves rather much. So in this particular instance, we have an issue with standard 4, which is honesty. That standard states that an educator shall exemplify honesty and integrity in the course of professional practice. And the unethical issue that we have in this particular instance is number 4, which is reasons for absences or leave. Because again, it appears that both coaches have fabricated being sick as an excuse to attend the game without having to either use personal time or run the risk of their absence not being excused because they were choosing to miss work for a basketball game. In this particular situation, as principal, the first thing I would try to do is gather any available evidence of the teachers attending the basketball game. So this could be a screenshot of a video recording, it could be a video playback that maybe I see, anything that serves as tangible evidence so I can present it to the teachers when we meet in person. During this in-person meeting, again, I'll discuss with them what I saw or what has become public knowledge of them being at this basketball game. And in this meeting, we'll also review the school and district's absent policy so that they can understand how their choice has put them in a situation where they violated the code of ethics for educators. As a result of their actions, I'll issue a formal letter of reprimand, which will be added to their certification files, and that is where human resources comes into play. So the first thing I would do is contact the absence manager to see if their time theft violation results in any punitive action from the district that may exceed a formal letter of reprimand. But I'll also contact employer relations and the certification management team so that this letter of reprimand is added to their files and is a part of their certificates. That way, it's one of those things where they have been formally warned that if something of this extent is to happen again, they may be at risk of suspension or termination. In this next scenario, we will be focusing on an incident with the grade book. During a meeting with a teacher, a parent is angry and is criticizing the teacher about their grading practices. She feels like the teacher is grading her child with some biased intent as it is compared to other students in the class. Out of frustration, the teacher decides to show the parent the grade book, and in doing so, shows the parents the grades of all of the students who are in the class with her child. The code of ethics issue in this particular situation is Standard 7, which is confidential information, which states that an educator shall comply with state and federal laws and state school board policies relating to the confidentiality of student and personnel records, standardized test materials, and other information. In this particular instance, the unethical conduct that's being displayed is the first statement, which is the sharing of confidential information concerning student academic and disciplinary records. And again, this is all based on sharing that grade book with the parent and allowing the parent to see the grades of other students in her child's class. As a principal in this particular instance, the first thing that I would do is conduct an in-person meeting with the teacher just to gather a little bit more insight into what led to the teacher sharing the grade book with the parent during the meeting. The next thing that I would do is review the violation based on the actions of the teacher and or share with the teacher that although I can understand the frustration in that particular moment, we as professionals must maintain our composure and still be in compliance with the ethical conduct that we are expected to follow. My action in this particular instance would be an informal written warning because although there was an ethics violation that took place, I can understand from an empathy standpoint how sometimes when our emotions get the best of us, we make brash decisions to try to coddle a situation. And so, although the violation did take place, I would try to empathize a little bit with the teacher because it is a very tough job and make sure that I'm not just pretending that nothing happened, but at the same time putting an expectation in place that we must follow the conduct that we are given from an ethics standpoint. From a human resources involvement perspective, I would make sure that the employee relations department is aware of the situation for reporting purposes, because this may be a situation where, for example, if the parent decides to go on social media and share the information about how this student has a lower grade, but this student has a higher grade, and also express that she's seen the grade book, it may create a litigation issue. And so I just want to make sure that the Human Resources Department is aware of the situation that took place, although the teacher is only being given an informal written warning to make sure that this doesn't happen again. For this next scenario, we're going to call this one Friday night flights. So, two teachers are assigned to attend the Friday night high school football game, but before going to the game, they decided they wanted to join some colleagues at an after school faculty happy hour for a few drinks and a sandwich. Upon leaving the happy hour, they show up to the football game. However, both teachers smell of alcohol. And mind you, they're around families, they're around students, and they have the presence of being under the influence. So, the code of ethics issue in this particular situation is standard 3, which is alcohol or drugs, which states that an educator should refrain from the use of alcohol or illegal unauthorized drugs during the course of professional practice. The unethical conduct in this particular situation is the second statement of Standard 3, which states that being on school or local unit of administration, school district premises, or at a school related activity involving students while under the influence or possessing or consuming alcohol. So, again, in this particular situation, the issue at hand is the appearance of both teachers being under the influence while at this football game. In this particular scenario, the first thing that I would do is have an in-person meeting with the teachers to discuss how, although they may not have been what is deemed as being legally drunk, they were still in violation of the code of ethics policies. In addition to that, making sure that we're reiterating the purpose of them attending these games in the first place. And so typically, when teachers or administrators are assigned to go to games, not only is it to show support, but in some instances, it's to help maintain order with a student body that they are familiar with and with a student body who is familiar with them. And if you're interacting with students while they're smelling like alcohol, it presents an unethical message to the students in terms of acceptable behaviors when you are at school related events or around children in general. So the action that I would take in this particular instance is not only giving them a letter of reprimand, but also mandating for them to complete an ethics training based around the use of substances when they are in an education setting. For human resources involvement, I would inform the employee relations team of the code violation and also make sure that they are assisting in the scheduling of this ethics training so it can be completed within a reasonable amount of time. And then the next thing that I would do is again contact the certification management team to ensure that this letter of reprimand is added to their file for certification purposes. Moving on to scenario 8, we'll focus on test pictures. During a standardized test, there's a teacher who is serving as a test proctor, and this teacher has decided to take photographs on their cell phone of materials that are being shared on the test, such as questions and answers. Once the test concludes, this teacher then shows what was photographed to their department colleagues. After this incident takes place, there is a colleague who is amongst the department who decides to report this incident to the principal. The code of ethics that is being violated in this particular incident is Standard 10, which is testing, which states that an educator shall administer state mandated assessments fairly and ethically. And the unethical conduct that's taking place is statement number 1, which is committing any act that breaches test security. Upon being informed of this incident, I would immediately try to have a formal meeting with this colleague in order to discover more about what was being shared, such as questions, answer, anything that's pertinent to a particular student, just to make sure that I have a full grasp of the information that was compromised during this testing period. What I would then do is meet with the teacher who was serving as a test proctor to discuss the level of violation that this is. When it comes to things that are pertaining testing, standardized testing in particular, the matter of test security is always a big discussion because you want to make sure that the test that is being administered is maintaining its credibility and its integrity in terms of what information is being shared so that the students are not being made aware of that information prior to the test being taken and given some type of advantage. So discussing this violation is something that definitely needs to take place. What I will also try to do is retain the information that was recorded on the phone because of the nature of this particular violation. The cell phone does become subject to open records, and so the cell phone may be confiscated in a particular instance, maybe not by me during my investigation, but by the Georgia Professional Standards Commission, which we'll talk about in just a moment, or Human Resources. And so trying to retain a copy of this information before we get to that extent is probably in the best judgment of the teacher. And then the thing that I would have to do, in addition to all of this, is contact the district test coordinator to report this irregularity so that they can investigate it further, as this may unfortunately result in an invalidation of the students who is taking this particular section of the test, and they may have to take the test again. And so, because of the severity of this particular action, my action as principal would be to suspend this teacher without pay. Involving human resources would be sharing this particular instance with employee relations so that they can look further into the violation that took place. And then I will also contact the certification and records management to make sure that punitive action is being taken against this teacher certificate, as this is a violation of the code of ethics and a very serious violation of the code of ethics. For our next scenario, we'll be focusing on the Sunshine Fund. In this scenario, there is a teacher who is collecting funds for the Sunshine Fund to be used for any type of events or acknowledgments that the Sunshine Committee may be responsible for. But in collecting these funds, this teacher is depositing Sunshine Fund's money into her personal checkings account. Although she is keeping careful records of the funds that she's receiving from the Sunshine Fund and her personal money to make sure the two are not being intertwined, this is still a code of ethics violation of Standard 5, public funds and property. This particular standard states that an educator entrusted with public funds and property shall honor that trust with a high level of honesty, accuracy, and responsibility. Statement 4 of this standard, which is commingling public and school-related funds with personal funds or a checking account, is the issue of ethics in this particular situation because of the commingling of the Sunshine Fund money with her own personal money. In approaching this particular situation, I took the approach that all of the staff members who deal with financial transactions or deal with money in any particular way are trained on money management. And so the first thing that I would do is meet with this teacher to further understand her process for collecting funds for the Sunshine Fund and just to get an understanding of what her rationale is in terms of adding those funds to her personal account. From there, I would just provide some recommendations in terms of how we could avoid situations such as this one. And one of those recommendations would be working with a bookkeeper to try to set up some type of tracking system and funnel that money into an account that is orchestrated by the school as opposed to her personal account. Because although she's keeping careful records of the money that's going into her account from the Sunshine Fund and her own money, this is still a violation of the Code of Ethics. So the other thing that I would try to do is collect the records of the funds because this is information that, again, because it's related to the school, although it is tied into her own personal account, would need to be turned over to human resources for investigative purposes. And so the action I would take in this particular instance is a letter of reprimand with the possibility of suspension pending the human resources investigation of what they find and if the money was being managed properly, although there was a violation that took place. So involving human resources would include contacting employee relations with the collected evidence so they can investigate the matter further. And then lastly, coordinating additional ethics training on finances as a punitive directive, either for her return if a suspicion is given, or for her knowledge if she's not suspended, but for future references of making sure that she is managing finances properly if that is a role that she was ever to be given again. And for our final scenario, we have the matter of a criminal omission. A teacher shares that he failed to include the fact that he was charged with felony shoplifting while in college. In this particular instance, the code of ethics issue is standard 4, which is honesty, and as stated earlier, an educator shall exemplify honesty and integrity in the course of professional practice. And the statement here of unethical practice is the falsifying, misrepresentation, or omitting of professional qualifications, criminal history, particularly college or staff development credit and or degrees of academic award and employment history, which is a part of statement number 1 under standard 4. Because the teacher chose to withhold this information from human resources during the application process, there would be a meeting that takes place in person with this teacher to have him understand just how serious of a violation this is for the safety and the sanctity of the teaching environment, because it could be a larger crime, but a crime is a crime. And so there would be a meeting that takes place to get an account of why this teacher chose to withhold this information, what the charges was that took place, and this information will be presented to the board for what my action would be, which would be a recommendation of termination for this employment. Now, typically in school districts, there is a clause in place that states that a teacher must receive notice of termination and that they are granted a hearing to possibly defend themselves against the action. And so it wouldn't be an immediate termination. It would just kind of be the start of the process. And that's why the Board of Education would get involved with the information that would provide for them in regards to this teacher withholding this information. From a human resources standpoint, I would alert employee relations as they have to investigate this whole situation and be made aware of the situation so that when that hearing takes place, they have their investigation that they can also provide in terms of their recommendation as well. I will also contact the staffing director just to make them aware of what has taken place and to allow them to look into the teacher's background again to see if this is something that pops up and just to make them aware for future candidates who may apply for a more thorough search to prevent something like this from happening again. And then lastly, I'll contact the certification manager, as this may be one of those things that leads to the teacher's certificate being revoked. And so making sure that all of this documentation is added to that teacher certificate for documentation purposes. So in completing this presentation, here are a few of the takeaways that I gained. As a budding educational leader, one of the first takeaways that I had was the importance of being familiar with the code of ethics, and not only for the sake of knowledge of what these codes and standards are, but also for justification of actions. And so throughout the course of this presentation, I presented the different ways in which I would take punitive measures against educators who violate certain code of ethics standards. And so making sure that you can justify those things with being knowledgeable of the standards in the first place is very important. It's important to keep in mind also that these are things that can cost educators money and other educational opportunities or employment opportunities. And so being knowledgeable of these standards and how they apply to certain situations is very important. The next takeaway that I had is the importance of making sure you document everything. So whether it's evidence, meeting notes, if you're documenting the date that a report was made to you from an incident standpoint, whether it's keeping track of the individuals who are involved with these different things, keeping documentation of everything and having tangible evidence that you can present in the event that something comes up and you had to have a hearing is very important. The next takeaway that I had is the importance of making sure you're preparing yourself as leaders to have difficult conversations and to make difficult decisions. As previously stated, sometimes these decisions are things that affect the livelihood of people. And so you want to make sure that not only do you have justification, but you're confident in the decisions that you're making, and keeping at the forefront of your mind that the decisions that we're making as educational leaders is to preserve the educational environment and to protect the kids. The fourth takeaway that I have from this presentation is how helpful it is to have some sort of tiered system for punitive actions to make sure that you're establishing clear and cut, transparent guidelines and protocols for if this happens, this is to follow. If it's a major event, there will be major consequences. If it's a minor thing, then it may have a minor punitive reprimand, but there's still a system in place to inform staff of how certain instances are to be addressed if they are to arise. And then the last thing that I took away from this presentation is the importance of making sure that all incidents, no matter how big or small, are being reported to human resources in order to be in compliance with standard 8 of the Code of Ethics for Educators. And so it doesn't matter what the nature of the incident is, it is still good ethical practice to keep human resources abreast of all of these things that are taking place. Thank you for listening to my presentation.